Hi, this is Dave Tice from Buffalo Revisited. You're listening to the Australian Rock Show with the Rock and Grey Brothers. Ladies and gentlemen, rock hard.
Hey folks, it is Colin Gray with you today, and welcome to show number 72 of the Australian Rock Show. Thank you very much for downloading, for streaming, for listening. However it is that you listen to the show via any number of platforms, we really appreciate your support. For 50 years, Dave Tice has been at the front line of the Australian rock scene. From his time with late 60s Brisbane outfit Head, to playing with the Count Bishops in the UK in the 1970s, and then years spent with the Headhunters, to playing with Mark Evans in the Tice Evans Band, to fronting his own band, Dave Tice has more than paid his dues and deserves his place in the pages of Australia's rock history. Yet, it is with Buffalo, a band who pioneered Australia's heavy rock sound in the early to mid-70s, that he is most well known. Dead Forever, Volcanic Rock, and Only Want You For Your Body are landmark heavy rock albums that continue to resonate with rock fans the world over. A couple of weeks ago, friend of the show Stephen Danno sat down with Dave Tice and dug deep into Dave's past, with Dave talking about everything from his favourite Buffalo songs to his love for the blues, Peter Wells, Black Sabbath, and his current band, Buffalo Revisited, as well as much, much more. Anyway, that's enough talk. Crank the volume up and let's rip into it.
This is Stephen Danno here, on location for the Rock and Roll and Grey Brothers, and today I have with me the voice of Buffalo, the voice of Buffalo Revisited. He's also been in the Count Bishops, the Headhunters, Dave Tice Band. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for the one and only Mr. Dave Tice. Hooray. How you doing, Dave?
Yeah, good, Steve. How you doing, brother?
Good. You're in Buffalo Revisited these days, doing the sound, the smell, the sights of Buffalo.
Yes, well, the smells mainly, but yeah, new lineup at the moment with Steve Lorcan on bass, who worked in the last lineup of Buffalo Revisited, and we've got Troy Skerry on guitar, fantastic guitar player. Marcus Fraser, a young, very, very energetic drummer working with us. Myself, of course, I'm doing the vocals. But I got to tell you, this is one hell of a lineup, man. And we've got a show coming up on June the 3rd, our first show with this lineup. I'm really looking forward to it.
June the 3rd at the Bridge Hotel.
June the 3rd at the Bridge, that's correct, yes.
And that's all Buffalo songs.
All Buffalo songs, absolutely. Well, we never used to play too many other people's songs back in the day, and I'm damned if I'm going to play it now.
100% beef?
Beef?
Yeah, buffalo beef.
Yeah, well, yeah, I suppose. That's game meat, though,
No vegetables.
It's a bit gamey.
That's it. So today what we're going to do is we thought we'd get you to dig deep into your memory, brain cells, and talk about some of your favourite Buffalo songs and some of the stories relating to those individual songs, memories of recording, memories of writing them, memories of the guys who were in the band, John Baxter, Pete Wells, Jimmy Economou.
I'm glad you reminded me of that, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, when we talk about favourite Buffalo songs, it's difficult to pick out individual songs, to be honest with you, because we always looked at the stuff that we did as album material. So a lot of bands, of course, recorded mainly with singles in mind. We very rarely did that at all. But nonetheless, I mean, most of the songs have little stories to them. You take a thing like "On a Skirt Lifter, Not a Shirt Raiser," for instance. Well, I mean, look, we were actually rehearsing one day at a place in Darlinghurst here, and it wasn't very secure. While we were banging away, this old guy wandered in carrying a bottle of methylated spirits and sat down in the corner listening to us, shaking his head as all these long-haired guys playing this music, and you could tell that he was an older sort of fellow, and he thought because we had long hair that we might have been gay or something.
Bunch of pufters.
Yeah, that's right. and he sat there. We finished doing this song, and he said, "Yeah," he said, "I've got to tell you, man. I'm a skirt lifter, not a shirt raiser." And so that sounded to me like a great line, and so we wrote a song with that title, and it's one of the favourite Buffalo songs. I'm a skirt lifter, not a shirt raiser, and I think. We wanted to make sure that everybody knew that we actually weren't gay either. We just, just because we had long hair didn't mean we were gay.
Leather pants.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was a different era though in those days. Of course, everybody was wearing long hair and tie-dye T-shirts and all the rest of it, and we were just part of that. That's the way it was in those days. Long hair. These days, I'd love to have long hair again, but unfortunately, I have to keep it closely shaved to the top of my head nowadays.
So the gentleman that walked into the room just off the street at up Darlinghurst, was it?
Yeah, that's right.
He's probably entitled to some songwriting royalties.
Well,
his contribution.
I'd be surprised if he saw out the year, quite frankly. I mean, he wasn't young, and he was giving himself a hell of a beating with that methylated spirits, I've got to tell you, you know.
Was that your studio? Was it Studio 22 used to rehearse at? Was that up Darlinghurst? Or?
Yeah, it was something like Studio 52 or something. I think it was 52. There weren't a lot of rehearsal studios around in those days, and in fact, that one was attached to a music shop, which had a lot of second-hand electronic gear in it. I can't remember the guy who ran it now, but... yeah, it was just, you know, the back room of his shop, really, you know.
A little PA and...
Oh, yeah, well, I mean, the interesting thing was that the PA system that he had in that particular room was... Do you remember those old big cellular cinema horns?
Oh, yeah, he used to have them in the still halls. And
yeah, about 4 foot square on each side, and they're like, you know, segments. That was a PA. Needless to say, wasn't the best sounding rig in the world. It was very early days. I mean, Buffalo used to tour in those days, and our PA system consisted of 4 columns of 4 by 12 inch speakers hooked up to a Dynacord PA head, which was slaved through a Leonard head. You know, and in those days, things like foldback systems and monitors were unheard of, so we never used to use which explains why my voice sounds the way it does, I think.
You've got to scream over the top of those noisy buggers.
Yeah, well, I mean, when I was younger, I could easily do that, you know. Well, at least I thought I could. I could have been wrong.
There's no drums, no guitars going through the PA usually, just...
No, well, you see, John Baxter, who was a guitar player in the band and my co-writer on most of that stuff, he had a 200-watt Strauss Hurricane, I think it was called, which was... huge amp for those days, 2 4x12 cabs with a 200-watt head, and Peter Wells had a 200-watt Strauss Bandit. And those amps were made in Melbourne in those days, and you know, they were easily as good as the Marshalls. Fantastic amps, you know. In fact, John, I saw an interview with him recently where he said that that Strauss was the best amp he ever used. You know, you can't get it now, of course.
All right, let's go to the song we were just talking about. On a skirt lift and not a shirt raiser. Okay, we're back. We're back with Dave Tice. We're on the Australian Rock Show, and we're going to talk about Dave's favourite Buffalo songs, his memories of recording, writing, and those good old days of the Buffalo era, cruising around the country in a van, causing havoc. What's the next track we're going to talk about, Dave?
Well, look, I think that Dead Forever is one that I got to mention. You know, Dead Forever was, of course, the title track of the first album. And really, to me, that was the first song of Buffalo's that really distilled what the band was all about, which, of course, is, you know, we all know now is heavy rock. But that song was written in a band house in Surfers Paradise, and at the time we were doing a series of shows at a place called the Chevron Hotel in Surfers Paradise, and the guy that used to take bands up there had a house where he used to put the bands up while they were staying there. And the story went around that previous to it being used as a band house, there'd been an old fellow lived there who'd actually died in his bed. And the story was that the place was haunted. So I can't remember who suggested it. It was probably John, because he was always up for something strange. Right. But he suggested we have a séance in this place.
It was the time and it was the era, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was after a gig, and it would have been like 1 o'clock in the morning or something, and here we were sat around in the lounge room on the floor with the Ouija sort of thing laid out.
The Ouija board.
The Ouija board. It wasn't. We didn't have a big board, but we made it up out of bits of paper with all the letters on it, and a bit of cardboard with a glass. We all put our fingers on it and asked questions, and John Baxter was one of the first to ask a question, and he said, "What's it like being dead?" Now, that's a strange sort of question, but if you're talking to somebody who's dead, maybe they know the answer. Anyway, the answer came back spelled out, dead forever.
The theory was that the mystical powers, would guide your hand across the letters.
Well, we're supposed to do it, without moving it ourselves. We just kept our fingers on it and moving around. Now, it moved around. I've always had a theory that, in fact, Pete Wells was moving that unknown to us. It's just the sort of thing Pete would have done. But, as I say, it came out Dead Forever, and we wrote a song within a day or so using that for the title, which became the title song for the first album. And as I say, to me, that's the first song that really distilled the Buffalo sound.
It was a lot heavier and a lot more a way out arrangement, like different things going on, as opposed to some of the other Buffalo songs from that era. Like you think about things like Susie Sunshine, verse, chorus. This sort of took it to that whole new
Exactly right,
direction.
Steve. Exactly right, yeah. I mean, a lot of the stuff that we wrote ourselves back in the day, especially when we got to the second album, were really pretty much stream of consciousness things in the studio. We didn't go into the studio with a swag of songs in our back pocket. We might go on with 2 or 3 songs and a whole bunch of riff ideas which we would jam on in the studio. Well, we could because the record company was paying for it in those days. And we always used to try and run up a nice big bill so they have a good reason to promote it.
Which you're probably still paying that bill back 40 years after the fact.
Well, I'd imagine those bills will probably be paid off in about 2035. But hey, rock and roll, man, you don't worry about the bills at the time. All you worry about is, wow, this is the best party I've ever been involved in, and I hope it doesn't stop.
All right, let's hear the great track, Dead Forever, one of the first albums to be released on the Vertigo label.
Yes.
From a non-European band.
I think, as far as I'm aware, I think we were the only non-European band to be released on Vertigo. And as you say, we were quite early in the piece. There were a couple of, I think, was Black Sabbath on Vertigo?
Yeah, they were.
Yeah, that's right. And really, it's funny, I mean, we were always compared to Black Sabbath. And I can understand why people will say that, but for me personally, I don't really think that we were that similar to them. Interestingly enough, when we do our first show with the lineup this year in June, Paranoid is going to be one of the songs we're going to play, just as a bit of a sign of respect for Black Sabbath.
You actually played that back in the day.
Yeah, no, we used to do it. It wasn't something we did all the time. Because for a start, we didn't want to be seen as a band that was trying to be Australia's Black Sabbath, although we continually got lumbered with that title, that label.
And of course, Buffalo played a show with Black Sabbath in Sydney, which we'll talk about a bit later on. The Horden Pavilion.
The Horden Pavilion, that's right.
We'll talk about that later on, Dave. Let's go to the track Dead Forever from the Dead Forever album. Okay, we're back with Dave Tice from Buffalo Revisited, and we're talking about Dave's favourite Buffalo songs from way back on the Vertigo label. Blow Your Speakers. What's the next song, Dave?
Well, I think King's Cross Ladies, to be honest with you, because this is yet again another song that we're going to be playing in our live shows coming up. But for the first couple of years or so that Buffalo were going, Pete Wells and I, as well as John Baxter, were actually living in King's Cross. Interesting time. During that period, of course, we were being flooded by American servicemen who were on leave from their for tour of duty in Vietnam, because that Vietnam War was going on at the time, and so you get a boat arrive from Vietnam with about 3,000 sailors on it and soldiers, and they'd all come into the King's Cross and spend a huge amount of money over 2 weeks, and we were playing at a place called the Groovy Room. One of the earliest gigs that we used to do regularly. We do like 5-6 nights a week there. And really what it was a clip joint. Now, when I say that, what it was all about was that the servicemen would come with all this money in their pockets. They'd come into a place like the Groovy Room where we'd be playing, and every table would have at least one girl sitting on it, all of whom were working girls, of course. And most of them were engaged to at least 3 or 4 different American servicemen who would send them money back from Vietnam and rings and God knows what else. And, of course, being surrounded by that, we took that all in, watching it all going on around us, and it really inspired a thing like King's Cross Ladies, because I say we lived in the area, we saw the working girls going about their business, and all the money that was being made of those days, and it was a wild old scene. So what do you do? I mean, if you're going to write a song, the best thing to do is just to write something about your own experiences and what's going on around you.
Tell us about the Groovy Room. It's one of those little, there's lots of those little clubs around the cross at the time. There'd be dozens of clubs that could cater to all the soldiers from overseas.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, the Groovy Room was downstairs, right next door to a place called Sweethearts. Now, anybody that's heard any Cold Chisel songs would know about Breakfast at Sweethearts, right, which was upstairs, right on Darlinghurst Road.
Yeah. Oh, okay. That's
and the Groovy Room was downstairs underneath the place, it was funny, man. I was standing at the bar there one day, waiting to get a drink, and this soldier came up and he ordered a bourbon and coke for himself and a glass of champagne. Now, I've got to tell you guys, people will be buying the champagne for the working girls that were waiting there for them. Those girls, believe me, weren't drinking champagne. They were drinking lemonade, right? But they were being told that they were actually buying champagne. So this guy, when we're talking about the early 70s here, ladies and gentlemen, so you know the difference in the value of money in those days. And the American soldier handed over a $50 note to pay for a bourbon and coke and a champagne, and he got no change. $50 for 2 drinks. Now, that's why they used to call it a clip joint, because you used to get well truly clipped. But, you know, the funny thing is as well that we'd be playing between midday and 3 in the afternoon, and then from 6 o'clock until midnight. And all these various soldiers and that would come into the place, and invariably there'd be a number of black servicemen as well. Now, I reckon that every one of those black servicemen had been in the Temptations at some stage, right?
So they claim.
That's what they used to claim. And every one of them wanted to get up and do songs with the band. So, we'd be trying to play our own stuff, and then part of the way through the night we'd be doing like Knock on Wood and all those kind of things, and backing up these black servicemen. Interestingly, even though they were lying, of course, that they were in the Temptations, most of those guys were pretty bloody good singers too. You know, they all had good sense of timing, good voices. So it was fun.
So was that Buffalo then, or was that Head, or?
Well, it was a bit of a changeover period, really. I mean, we were changing our name. I think we'd just changed our name to Buffalo at that stage. We'd had a lot of trouble trying to get an agent to take us on when we called ourselves Head. We came down from Brisbane, Pete and I, and started the band down in Sydney here. And we'd worked under that name in Brisbane with no problems. But when we came to Sydney, the agent said to us, well, no, nobody's going to book a band called Head because it's got too many, there's connotations of sex and drugs in there, which we thought was pretty cool. But we were told by one agent that he would book us, but we had to change our name. And his suggestion was that we needed a name beginning with B, because his theory was that all band names beginning with B were automatically successful. And he quoted the Beatles, of course, and the Beach Boys. So we wanted
Dylan. He named himself after a B.
Yeah, well, there you go. But I mean, we looked at a map of Australia because we wanted something that was at least somehow attached to Australia, and stuck a pin in a map of Australia that also showed where the distribution of wildlife was around the country. Ended up the nearest name beginning with B to where the pin was Buffalo, because Northern Territory, there are a lot of buffalo up there, water buffaloes. So we thought, well, a great name for a heavy rock band, which is what we called ourselves from then on. So
the band could have been called Blacktown or Balgala or
Bumfluff.
Bendigo.
Bumfluff.
Oh, it's a good town. People there. Back of Burke.
Yeah, well, I mean, there was a lot of options, of course, but I think that Buffalo was appropriate for us. As the immortal bard said, what's in a name? A rose by any other name would smell as sweet or as smelly as we were. There you go.
All right, we'll cue up now. King's Cross Ladies, Buffalo. Okay, we're back on the Australian Rock Show. The Rockin' and Rollin' Gray Brothers sent me a telegram during the week saying, Steve, can you please interview Dave Tice? I've got him right here, and we're talking about Buffalo songs. So let's talk about, from the Only Want You For Your Body album, track 2, I think it is. Or was it track 3?
Your memory's better.
No, it's not. Do Messiah, great song. Tell us about that one. That was a bit of a step forward for Buffalo with production, and it's got a lot of effects on it.
Well, the thing about it is that, like a lot of things, with a lot of bands, the second album, we had a bit more of a budget to play with for a start, because we were, having done one album and done reasonably well with that, the record company were prepared to back us a bit at the time. But Dune Messiah, around about that period of time, I've always been a big reader, and I still read a lot these days. And during that period of time, I was reading a lot of science fiction. And of course, one of the iconic science fiction series is the Dune books by Frank Herbert, which had quite a big effect on me. I thought, great writing, interesting story. It's unfortunate that the movie they made with Sting in it didn't quite come up to that standard. It was a bit naff, but the books themselves were fantastic. And as I said about Skirt Lifter, songs, you know, if they really are to mean anything, you need to be writing about something you have some knowledge of or some connection to. And Dune Messiah, as I say, that's, you know, the core of all those Dune books. And you know, I try to relate the Dune stories to our own biblical stories, because Dune is all about you know, various religions and how they go, how they grow, and how we all sort of get sucked into them one way or another, you know. So I try to put imagery from the books and from our own Bible stories into the same song.
And musically, it's a real sort of step forward for Buffalo too. Like,
yeah, well, it's quite expansive
less
song, isn't
jamming
it?
and-
Yeah, it's quite reasonably sort of arranged, and it's quite an expansive song as well, which, you know, leaves plenty of room for guitar players to stretch out on. And luckily, we've got a bloke that can do that with Troy, you know. And I must say that it's interesting to me in rehearsal that sometimes I turn around and I can see Troy playing his guitar, and he's making a lot of the same moves that John Baxter used to make, which immediately told me that we're on the right track.
I reckon he's been possessed by some sort of satanic,
You think he's been possessed?
overpowering force.
Well, that's possible. I think he's reasonably sort of immune to that kind of thing myself, but he's copped it very well. And, you know, I've got to tell you once again, guys, that, you know, this particular lineup, which is the third one of Buffalo Revisited, if you've been sort of following what I've been up to, this is the one that I'm the most happy about. It's really kicking ass.
So all these songs will be played at the Bridge Hotel,
Yeah.
June 3rd.
Yeah, well, I mean, the bulk of the set really is based around the Volcanic Rock album. We don't do all of that album, but a lot of the stuff that is in the set is from that particular album. To me, as I say, Dead Forever was the first song on that first album that really defined where we were heading, sound-wise, and all the rest of it, and in our attitude. Volcanic Rock, the album, was pretty much the distillation of that. And things like Dune Messiah, you know, name them Freedom, all those kind of songs, you know, they came out of the fact that we really were comfortable in our own skin at that time, and we were trying to do something that wasn't at all like Sherbet or Hush or any of those other so-called rock bands, which in my opinion have always been pop bands. But, you know, we were for a long time pushing against the tide, you know, because the media in this country weren't prepared to accept what we were doing. They wanted 3-minute little pop ditties, and we weren't delivering those.
Because in those days, unless you got on 2SM, it'd be a real struggle for a band to make a living and get crowds and big.
Well, that's right. I don't think we ever got played on 2SM,
Yeah.
you know. But, I mean, the thing about Buffalo is I think that our success, if you want to call it that, wasn't predicated on airplay at all. It was always based on the fact that we used to go out and blow people away with how we presented our music to them, you know, the show, and, you know, it could be pretty chaotic sometimes, but it was always exciting.
That's part of the magic, I guess, the chaos.
Yeah, well, you know, I think about it a lot like, you know, you go to the circus, man, you know, and you see the bloke on the high wire, you know. Now, if the guy just walks across the wire, who gives a shit, man? You know what I mean? Okay, he walked across the wire. But if he looks like he's going to fall off, that's when it gets exciting. And I think it's the same with music, you know. You've got to push it close to the edge as much as you can. You've got to give it some sort of danger. And one thing about Buffalo, especially in the early days, was we were fucking dangerous. I hope you can say that on radio.
Yeah.
Fucking.
Oh, we can. Bloody stuff and shit.
Well, we're in the 2000s now. I suppose we
are.
can say whatever we like. But
Yes.
yeah, no, as I say, you know, Buffalo, there was always a certain element of danger about it, mainly because we were never quite sure where the songs were going to go. And in fact, before we started recording, we didn't really have songs. We were out doing shows, making them up on stage as we went.
Yeah.
You know, and I know for Pete Wells, for instance, who unfortunately is not with us anymore. You all know Pete Wells from his slide playing in Rose Tattoo, but to me, Pete was always a fantastic bass player. He was a bass player in Buffalo, and it's only because Pete was good enough to be able to change and follow what John was doing at any stage that we were able to do what we were doing, really.
Okay, we'll go to the track Do Messiah.
Do Messiah.
This is on the Only Want You For Your Body album. Now blow your effing speakers.
Yeah, freedom, yes. Well, there you go. You know, back in those 70s, there were a lot of changes going on in the world. The freedoms were being explored that we'd never had before. And in fact, without those kind of freedoms, I'm sure that bands like Buffalo and most of the bands that we know and remember these days would never had a chance to have been formed and to have worked. But besides, you know, the hippie movement and all the rest of it, I was always really concerned and wanted to talk about the way that, you know, we talk about freedom, but in many ways we don't actually have it. You know, we are subject to, you know, mass media, people that run those mass medias with their own agendas to push at us, and we don't really get the full story. And you know, I always wanted to write something that pointed that out in its own subtle way and celebrated the idea of freedom, which pretty much is why I wrote, you know, the words to that song. I don't know if John, when he was coming up with the riff ideas, was on exactly the same wavelength as me. And in fact, the interesting thing is that I saw an interview which I'd been part of, done by email with an American magazine a while back, and John was also asked and answered some questions on that, and he said, I've realised that actually Dave wrote some really good lyrics, and because I never listened to him before. So it just goes to show you, guitar players, man, you know, they're so interested in their own little thing that they don't actually take a lot of notice of what the singer's doing. And John has always had a very conservative attitude to quite a lot of things like sex and drugs and all those kind of things, and in fact has been very, very much heavily involved in. He got religion after his first wife died, and I'm not at all surprised that happened. And you know, he's quite sort of, as I say, conservative. And I don't think he quite realised when we were doing those songs that, in fact, a lot of the things that I was writing and singing about from a vocalist point of view touched on the very things that he was interested in. You know, and I say, to me, to find out 30 years after the fact that he'd never actually listened to the lyrics that I wrote to those songs, that was a bit of a shock to me, quite frankly. But, you know,
I guess everyone in the band is just thinking about their own thing, and be it the drummer or bass player or guitar player.
Well, that's true, I suppose, you know, but at the same time, if you're going to be in a band, then you have to be aware and very much, you have to be all together on things, you know, you must have all the same focus. Now, and Buffalo certainly had, all the members had the same focus. I don't think it was something we sat down and thought about particularly, it just came about automatically, you know, just a natural evolution.
Because before John played, it was very much a bluesy sort of a Paul Butterfield.
Yeah, well, that's
what I've gathered over the years.
Well, that's right. I mean, Pete and I, when we came down from Brisbane, 1970, I suppose it was, had been working up in Brisbane, and we were a blues band, four-piece blues band, and we thought that that's what we were going to be doing when we came to Sydney. Soon after we got here, the guitar player and drummer that we brought down with us decided that they didn't want to stay in Sydney and went back home to Brisbane, and we looked about for other players, and one of the first guys we tried out was John Baxter, and I still recall to this day the first time we had a run through with John in somebody's basement in Darlinghurst, and we were trying to play blues stuff, and we took a break about halfway through this jam session, and Pete and I went outside for a cigarette, and I said to Pete at the time, I said, man, you know, this guy, he can't play blues, you know, what's going on here? And Pete said to me, he said, I don't know what he's doing, but it's kind of interesting. We should give it a go. And really, that's how it came about. And it's like a lot of things, you know, in this business. It's very hard to synthesize something. It's very difficult to say, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to get this bunch of blokes to do it. Okay? So often, when things come together, it's an organic thing. It's not something that you plan. It's just a happy coincidence, a happy gathering of the right people in the right place. And Buffalo was very much like that.
Would there have been a lot of bands playing blues at that time? From what I've read in magazines, that like every second band was a blues band, so it's quite interesting that he came along and just
Well,
threw that against the wall.
yeah, I suppose so. But mind you, I mean, you think about Blackfeather, right? You know, with albums like At the Mountains of Madness and all that sort of thing. Now, in my opinion, a lot of the bands, even bands like Blackfeather, they come from a blues background.
Yeah.
Most of them would have started out doing a lot of blues, but there was a period of time there, and I suppose it's still going on to a certain degree, but especially back in that stage where a lot of bands like Blackfeather, or who else was there? I can't think of them all now. Well, Tam and Shud, for instance, you know, bands like that, they were Tully, they were all trying to explore outside of that rather restricted blues format, which I love personally. I've always loved the blues. It's what got me involved in music to start with, and I still play it, you know, when I'm doing something like Buffalo Revisited. But there's no doubt at all that, you know, the blues format is very much set in stone, and it's difficult to work outside of that unless you are prepared to step away from those formats and try and be a bit more open. And Buffalo, along with a number of other bands of that period of time, were trying to do exactly that.
You can hear in songs like Freedom where it's got a bluesy feel, but obviously the chord changes and the arrangement, nothing like anything that Muddy Waters or Howlin' Wolf would do, but the feel's very much like that.
Yeah, well, that period of time was very much a time when songs became based on strong guitar riffs rather than clever chord progressions and you know, changes in the chords and that. You'd find that things would be pretty much on one chord, but it was all about the strength of the riff that was being played. You know, I mean, as we talked about Paranoid before, there's a perfect example. You know, but you know, even Black Sabbath, I'm sure that those guys started out initially a blues band.
They did. They were very much into the early Fleetwood Mac. And
well, you know, I mean, you mentioned Paul Butterfield before, and you know, before we came down to Sydney, Peter and I would have been playing probably half of that East-West album, you know, the Paul Butterfield East-West album. Great stuff, you know. I mean, you know, even bands like the Fabulous Thunderbirds are more recent, although they're not around so much anymore. There's great American bands like that. But the thing to me has always been that is very, very much an American form.
Yeah.
You know, like the blues. And, you know, the line about can white men play the blues, well, I think they can.
It's a different sort of blues.
Yeah, but it's a different kind of blues. Yeah, it's not exactly the same as the black guys play it. But I was always of the opinion, and I still am, that Australia should sound, bands in Australia should sound like Australian bands. You know, we do have an Australian sound. Not so long ago, actually it is long now, back in the early 90s, I had the occasion to go to Los Angeles and spend some time working with a guy called Dennis Walker, who was Robert Cray's producer and main songwriter for Robert Cray. And when I went over there, of course I took some stuff that I'd been doing with the Headhunters at the time, which he loved. And his first comment to me was, he said, "Man, where do you Australians find these drummers?" You know, because he was always amazed at how powerful Australian drummers tended to be, really, really strong hitters, you know. And it's true, you know. I mean, you talk to somebody like Guns N' Roses, and I've seen enough times where they say that what they based their sound on was what they'd heard from Australian bands like AC/DC, Rose Tattoo and bands like that. They don't sound exactly like them, but they took their clues from that, which is quite simple in many ways, but Australian bands have a lot of power about them, you know.
I wonder if it was the early days of playing in those big town halls that maybe other cities didn't have, where you really had to hit hard.
Oh, yeah.
Not only to please the audience, but to get over the sound of a PA and to get the sound from one end of the town hall, you know.
Yeah, well, I mean, besides anything else, you know, that was a period of time when amplifiers, guitar amplifiers, went from being little 10-watt things that the bloke used to play behind the horn section, you know, to being important and out the front. And then all of a sudden, from 20 to 30 watt amps, you've suddenly found bands with 100-watt Marshalls, you know, and you know, we were all in love with making a lot of noise. You know, you take someone like Billy Thorpe, who came from being, you know, a real pop guy, ended up, you know, the Aztecs, and you know, Buffalo did a gig with those guys back in the early days, you know, and they were famous for being so damn loud, and we thought we were going to be louder, okay? we played at a show called at a place called the Spinning Wheel in Narrabeen. Thorpe and his band were the main act, and we were playing support to them. So we gathered up amplifiers from all of our friends and hooked them all up together because we were going to blow Thorpe off the stage, right? Well, we thought we were loud, and we were bloody loud, man, you know, and it wasn't a big room. Thorpe came on with Lobby Lloyd playing guitar, and he had a 1,000-watt guitar amplifier.
No.
We weren't even in the same league, man.
Was it a big room, was it? What was the venue called in Narrabeen?
It was called the Spinning Wheel.
Was it a bar or a club?
Well, it was a sort of club, you know. It was one of those places above a bunch of shops. You go upstairs above these shops.
Okay, yeah.
Now, it would have probably held about 150 people, maybe
Holy
200,
Christ.
you know. If you got 200 in there, it was like sardines, you know. And believe me, the night we played there with Thorpe, it was back to the hill.
Yes.
You know, we thought, I think John had his 200-watt Strauss plus 200-watt Marshalls all hooked up together. We had amps banked up to the ceiling, right? And Thorpe came along, and it was like, oh damn, we've fallen short.
There's 200 deaf people out there from Narrabeen, which are probably still.
What was that, mate? What did you say?
Right, what track were we talking about again? We should introduce this track. We were talking about,
Freedom.
Freedom from Buffalo, from the fabulous Volcanic Rock album. Let's hear it. Okay, we are back. Steve and Danno here, the Australian Rock Show. We've got one more question for Dave Tice from Buffalo. He's also in Buffalo Revisited, playing June the 3rd, I believe.
June the 3rd, yeah,
Bridge Hotel
in Rozelle here in Sydney.
It's a groovy place, the Bridge Hotel.
It's been there running live music for 30 years,
30
you know,
years.
and there aren't very many venues you can say that about. And I've got to give kudos to Richard Keogh and his staff for keeping the thing going. Fantastic.
Seen some great shows there over the decades.
Oh yeah, no. Well, I've played there many times in various situations, you know, and it's, you know, it's a real rock and roll venue, man. You know, you walk past the toilets and you're sure that you just passed a sewage.
Just like the good old days.
You know, yeah, but you know, hey, we get over those things, and once enough joints have been smoked, nobody can smell the toilets anyway.
So we've got one more track to talk about from the Volcanic Rock album, Shylock. Tell us about Shylock.
Well,
That's a heavy song.
Well, yeah, but you know, I mean, it's a pretty heavy subject. You know, anybody that knows anything about Shakespeare, and probably a lot of people would have done a certain amount of study of Shakespeare when they were going through high school, as I did. And in fact, I still recall the story was The Merchant of Venice, the play of The Merchant of Venice, and Shylock, of course, is the moneylender who, when he doesn't get paid back, he decides to go to court and take a pound of flesh from the person that owes him this money. He gets talked out of it by Portia, who's the girlfriend of the non-paying client. But you know, it's these days, of course, it's not really politically correct to characterise people of the Jewish extraction as being moneylenders and usurers.
Heaven forbid.
But back in the day, because the Jewish people were always known as the ones, even in England, you know, through the early centuries, the kings used to borrow money from the Jewish moneylenders because they were the ones that had the money. And they were prepared to lend it out, you know, for a nice return, of course. And in fact, I've read about this, and a lot of the persecution of the Jews, especially in England, came about because English kings had borrowed money from them and didn't want to pay it back.
Ah, okay.
Right? Now, isn't that a familiar story?
Right.
So what they did was they demonised them and made them outcasts, which, you know, isn't it good to know that we've improved so much in our relationship with our neighbours?
I think we should take that attitude to the banks today, and we should just demonise the banks for doing the same thing.
Well,
and just
we're touching on politics here, Steve, and you know, I think you know, politics that's each man's individual choice.
It's a nice thought, though.
Yeah. Well, I think that any mob that makes $120 billion profit can afford to pay their way and help support the community that they take the money from.
I think you're right.
And this is what we need to be looking at these days. These organisations make an enormous amount of money, and yet what they do is every time they turn around and they find ways to gouge more out of us, and I think it's disgusting.
It's the big bosses we're talking about here at the banks, not the fine ground staff.
Well, no, it's the corporations themselves. Yeah. It's the way they're set up as corporations. I understand, you know, every business needs to make a profit. But the sort of profits that we're talking about here are obscene, you know. And meanwhile, we have people suffering from all kinds of various diseases, people who can't support themselves properly, can't find homes to live in, and yet these guys at the top of the level of these banks are driving around in expensive cars, making huge salaries every year, and it's just not. It's not fair. It's not right.
And they get $1 million pay rises every tick of the clock.
Yeah, well, they decide themselves how much they're going to make. You know, I mean, anybody that makes more than look, let's be liberal. Let's say $2 million a year. Is anybody really worth more than $2 million a year?
No.
Where do you spend all that money? What do you do with it?
It's a notch on your bank book.
Yeah,
it's a number.
It becomes meaningless after a while, doesn't it? You know, I mean, how many millions can you spend? How many Ferraris do you want? You know, if I could get half of one, I'd be happy.
That'd be nice, wouldn't it? Okay, on that note, we'll end this fabulous episode of the Australian Rock Show. This is Stephen Danno. I've been talking to Dave Tice. He's from Buffalo. He's now with Buffalo Revisited. I will shoot you back to the rockin' and rollin' Gray Brothers.
Thank you very much there, Steve. Stephen Danno in conversation with Dave Tice in an interview conducted on the 14th of May 2017. Don't forget Dave Tice and Buffalo Revisited. June the 3rd is the date. The Bridge Hotel in Rozelle in Sydney. Get along and show your support. Tickets available from moshtix.com.au, or you can check out thebridgehotel.com.au website for more information. Incidentally, when Steve asked Dave what his favourite Australian song was, he grabbed his harmonica and belted out a couple of bars of Spectrum's I'll Be Gone. Take a listen to this.
That's enough.
There is a special treat, fans. Dave Tice, I'll Be Gone, cover of Spectrum.
And that is sounding terrific. Be sure to check out our website at australianrockshow.com, where you can find all previous episodes of the Australian Rock Show available for free download. There's also a bunch of links there to our comments line, to our affiliate sponsors, and much, much more. If you dig this show or any of our shows, or in fact any of our ramblings on the rockbrat.com website, please contact us, as we love to hear from you. AustralianRockShow@gmail.com is the email address. Folks, we are just about out of time. Thanks very much for listening. Let's finish today's show with another Buffalo tune from Volcanic Rock. This is Shylock. This is Colin Gray. We'll talk to you soon.